Welcome, my darlings, to my humble chateau. Please make yourself very comfortable. Relax your mind and release your imagination to me. I will bring you a story to entrance and entertain. Perhaps a frightening one. Perhaps a steampunk. Perhaps a bit of mythology. Anyway, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe to me. Faeriefruit by Casper McSadden. All the neighborhood kids knew Mrs. McKinley was a witch. It was a playground truth whispered with such conviction and awe that we didn't dare think to question it. Miss McKinley, you know, the witch. Old ladies were supposed to be grandmothers and give out hard candies and sit inside knitting all day, not live alone in decrepit old cottages overgrown with ivy, with only the stray cats and crows for company. And they were definitely not supposed to live in graveyards. Cemetery, my mother would correct me. And she's not a witch. She's the groundskeeper. You wouldn't want anything to happen to Granddad, would you? Still weird to live beside a bunch of dead people, I mumbled under my breath. Never mind, our house was so close I could see the headstones from my bedroom. But kids never like the truth when the truth is too mundane. We wanted to believe Mrs. McKinley would dig up old bones to scry with. Whatever scrying was. That any missing cats had ended up in her cauldron. That she'd eaten the last little boy who dared to wander through her garden. That one especially sparked our imaginations. Every other kid claimed it was their cousin's, friend's, neighbor's brother, whose name always seemed to change with each new telling. Some days it was Jimmy, others it was Tom. Once I swore I heard he was called Harris, but one thin fact always stayed the same. He'd gone into Mrs. McKinley's garden and never come out again. Perhaps it was that pretend touch of danger that tempted us to make a game out of going in. It was Lizzie who suggested the idea. Lizzie wasn't exactly our leader. We didn't need a leader, and we weren't exactly friends. But there's only so many kids your own age within walking distance. Lizzie was one of them, and as the tallest and loudest, her ideas often ended up counting the most. I, like an idiot, spoke up. What if she catches us? We'll get in trouble. Lizzie barked out a laugh. What? You scared of the witch? No. My mom says witches don't even exist, I spat back. I didn't believe her, but Lizzie didn't need to know that. Then you've got no reason to go, right? I bit down on my cheek. Damn it, she tricked me. Either I was scared of a witch or I was scared of a little old lady, and neither was an acceptable option. All I managed to do was get myself nominated. Fine, then. The way I walked down the narrow road to Mrs. McKinley's side of the graveyard, you think I was being led to my own execution. Nervous energy fizzled under my skin like lightning in a bottle. As I made myself sick imagining all the hundreds of millions of ways this could go horribly wrong. But it was too late to back out now. If there was one thing worse than a coward, it was a cowardly quitter. The cottage sat on the edge of the grounds, just off the street and right beside the front gates. I suppose it was her duty to lock up at night. Not that it'd do much good. The wrought iron would be easy enough for hoodlums and teens to scale. Liz gave us all a leg up and then pushed herself over in one go. From there, a thin, short hedge was all that separated us from Mrs. McKinley's garden. It was a sprawl of overgrown grass, filled with wildflowers and weeds. Not that it wasn't well tended to in its own way. She clearly liked to grow her own fruit and vegetables. My mouth glistened at the sight of strawberries, and I had to remind myself that food from a witch is probably poison. Lizzie nudged me. Dare you to grab one? Why? She cracked a toothy grin. You want a trophy, don't you? I'd have been happy to get out of there with all my fingers and toes and skin still on my bones, but I nodded anyway. Whatever got Lizzie to shut up and get on with it. The buzz of excitement faded away as the group held its breath in anticipation. And then I was running, leaping across the hedge, catching my foot on the way down, my hands in the dirt, pushing myself back up before I had even finished stumbling. Every moment in here was another chance to get caught. I darted across the grass, kicked up dandelions as I went. I needed to grab something, not the strawberries. They were too close to the window. More chance to get eaten. Something else. There! A bush of gleaming, blood-red berries in the far corner. I sprinted towards them. Arms outstretched, grabbed a fistful and turned. I could see Lizzie and the others now, quietly cheering me on. I was so close, so close. My aching limbs loosened up with relief. And then a shadow passed across the window. I stopped dead. Had she seen me? She had to have seen me, but if she saw me, why wasn't she coming out? She should be coming out. What are you doing? Hurry up! I was running again, fumbling over the hedge, not stopping until I reached the wrought iron of the fence that marked freedom. I leaned against the flaking paint of the bars, beginning to feel the burn of a stitch in my side. The others crowded around me, howling and hollering, but it all seemed so faint when I could still hear my heartbeat hammering inside of me. Mrs. McKinley had seen me. I didn't know which possibility was worse. A creepy old witch who could curse me, or a little old lady who could tell my parents. We'd walked a little ways away from the graveyard before I made up some excuse about needing to head home. Instead, I circled back to the McKinley cottage. This time I came up to the front path, dragging my feet like stone all the way. The door glided open before I even had a chance to knock. I don't know what I expected when I saw Mrs. McKinley. Of course, I'd seen her before, but never up close, never like a person. Her skin was creased like a well-loved book, and she wore her hair rebelliously long and loose for a woman her age. She wasn't how I imagined her, or thought I had imagined her, but as soon as the image settled in my mind, I couldn't picture her any other way. She looked down at me with cold, curious eyes, and any hope I had that she hadn't seen me fizzled out like a candle. I didn't say anything. I just held out the clump of berries sheepishly. Sorry, I muttered, wishing I could disappear into the neck of my too-warm jumper. She plucked the clutch of berries from my hand and held them up to the light, inspecting them like a jewelry in diamonds. Didn't think you'd come back, she said. She slipped the berries into her pocket before eyeing me up and down. You're Philip's granddaughter, aren't you? I momentarily forgot my fear. Your new granddad? Her face softened into an almost smile. Only a little. Good man. Always tipped his cap whenever he came to see his wife. Your mother still brings flowers to him every other month. A pang of dread rattled around inside me at mention of my mum. I stared down at my sneakers. Are you going to tell her? Tell your... She started laughing, a hearty rasp that reminded me of a cackle of a crow. Girl, I was never going to tell your parents. Getting sick off Faeriefruit would have been punishment enough. But since you brought it back, I think we can call things even. Faeriefruit? The berry. She patted her pocket indicatively. Makes a person awful sick if it's not properly prepared. You can't eat it off the bush. But it does make a tasty jam. I made a batch the other day. If you'd like to try some. I nodded automatically. Maybe out of politeness. Maybe out of fear. I don't know. But that was all it took for her to lead me inside. Through the hallway, into a cozy kitchen with gauzy curtains and mismatched crockery lining the walls. This was the home of a witch? I sat myself down at the table, continuing my in-depth analysis of Mrs. McKinley's home decor, until a slice of sponge cake was placed in front of me. It was spread with juice-red jam that threatened to trickle down the sides in thick, gleaming globs, if not gobbled up fast enough. Mrs. McKinley took a seat opposite me, folding her hands on the table expectantly. "Enjoy," she said. I lifted up the cake, trying my best to keep my fingers away from the ever-sticky jam, and took a single, cautious bite. And then another, and another, until the generous slice had disappeared entirely. It tasted achingly sweet in my mouth, as smooth and rich as you'd imagine the wildest berry to be, as deliciously forbidden as sips of wine stolen on New Year's. I already wanted more. "You like that?" Mrs. McKinley chuckled. I nodded, licking away a smear of jam that spilled down my chin. A wave of self-consciousness ran across my skin as I tried to recompose myself. "So why is it called Faeriefruit?" It's a question that made her eyes light up. She pulled the berries out of her pocket, holding them out for me to see. "See the leaves?" I did. Each one had 5 gangly points, making it resemble a little person with a head and arms and legs. Beware the men who grow from roots and never eat their fairy fruits. Sorry? You don't read much folklore. I gave a soft shrug. Maybe I had a copy of the Brothers Grimm under my bed somewhere, but that was about it. Well, in the old stories, it's bad to eat the food of the fae. Fairies, that is. The humans that do usually end up getting trapped in fairyland, or eaten themselves. So when people discovered the strange berries that look like little people, make you sick, they simply assumed it was a fae curse. I nodded thoughtfully. It made enough sense, and then a thought spilled out of my sticky, jammed-up mouth before I could stop it. "Do you know a lot about curses?" She tilted her head to the side curiously. "Now, what makes you say that?" Never mind, because you kids all think I'm a witch." I'm pinned to my seat, my face perfectly placid, while underneath I am bubbling with fear. She stares down at me, an unreadable expression, until I realize she's really waiting for an answer. Well, I managed to choke out. "Are you?" And then she laughs, long and hard, and longer still, until even my relief turns tepid. "At least you're an honest girl," she said, finally. "No, I don't ride a broomstick or dance with the devil or anything like that. I'm just a simple old woman who keeps to herself in her garden and lives in a graveyard." I clamped my hand over my mouth a moment too late. A coy smile worked its way into the corners of her mouth. "That too. But don't you ever get creeped out?" She gave her head a soft shake. You know, your grandfather was a good man. It'd be strange to think any less of him just because he's in the ground. I stared down at the table. I can feel an unpleasantly itchy pang of guilt crawl up through me. Mrs. McKinley, I'm sorry. You already said that once, girl. Don't say anything you mean more than once. No, not just for the berries. I'm sorry I thought you were a witch. She smiled at me. You come say hi whenever you like, dear. I could use the company. Keep your nose clean and I promise I won't curse you. And then she winked at me. I walked home that day a little brighter, a little bolder, and the sweet taste of Faeriefruit still lingering in my mouth. I wasn't scared of Mrs. McKinley after that. If I saw her on our way to visit Granddad's grave, I'd give a wave no matter how far away. On some slow days when there was no one to play with, I'd wander over to her cottage and sit in her kitchen a while, learning bits of folklore I'd never find in the books under my bed, and happily eating Faeriefruit cake. She'd tell me more about fairies, real fairies, cruel fairies, not the dainty kind in flower petal dresses found on postcards, about their weakness for iron, the secrets of their names, the way they'd twist the truth into knots on their tongues to make it up for the fact that they can't lie. You'll never get a straight answer out of a fae, she said once. Always dodging questions. Sometimes the words you don't say are more important than the ones you do. I enjoyed that. Little bits of knowledge, however pointless, that gave me more power. A new way to see the world. The cake was nice, too. But what soured the taste was the days I didn't see Mrs. McKinley, when I slipped back into my old patterns and found myself playing with my maybe friends. She didn't come up all that much, but when she did, I took notice of every whisper and snicker and jeer wrapped around her name. She didn't deserve it, any of it. Annoyance started to buzz under my skin like an ugly itch, and it didn't take long for me to scratch it. It was a summery day when the hazy heat was making us bored and sluggish. It was Lizzie who started it, of course. It was always Lizzie. We could see what the mental old McKinley's up to. I heard Janie Davy's cat hasn't come home since. Leave her alone, Liz. She turned to me. What? She's not harming anyone. Let's just do something else. Since when are you scared of the weird old witch? An indignant spark roared up inside of me. I'm not, I muttered. R2. Am not. R. Not. And then an idea snapped into my head. Behind it was a trickle of guilt, but it was easy to drown out under all my anger and pride. Fine, I said. I'll prove it. Without another word, I turned and walked away, down the narrow road to Mrs. McKinley's side of the graveyard, all the while vaguely aware the others were following, bewilderedly behind. There was no hiding this time, no clambering over fences to avoid perfectly fine front gates. I walked right up the front path and knocked, the way I would if I were to visit on any other day. As soon as I thumped my fist on the painted wood of the front door, I heard the scuffling of scattering feet, the group rushing to seclude themselves in the safety of shadows and trees. Mrs. McKinley didn't seem surprised to see me. She never did. For a moment I felt that same flicker of guilt fizzle up inside of me. Here I was, exploiting the unearned reputation I hated for making myself look better. But I couldn't let them call me a coward. Sorry, Mrs. McKinley. Hello, dear, she said brightly. She peered over my shoulder curiously. Are your friends not going to join us? I didn't ask how she knew they were there. I simply slipped inside and let her close the door behind me. A little while later, I emerged from the cottage again, this time carrying a box of Faeriefruit cake. "For your friends," Mrs. McKinley had said with a wink. As soon as I was past the graveyard gate, I was swarmed, the center of a mass of grasping hands and awestruck eyes. "You actually went in there? What was it like? Are you crazy?" I tried to give my most casual shrug. I was already struggling to keep the proud grin off my face. There was nothing scary about what I'd done, but they didn't need to know that. My eye caught Lizzie, leaning back against the fence and projecting to the whole world how much she didn't care. I stared up at her. "Told you I wasn't scared." She looked at me all dark and stony, her eyes drifting down to the box. "What you got there?" As if she couldn't see through the clear plastic. "Just some cakes from Mrs. McKinley." I gestured to the rest of the group. "Want one?" Lizzie scoffed. "How do you know they aren't poisoned?" There was a murmur across the group. A battle between hesitation and temptation. "Well," I pried off the lid, reached in, lifted one out to take a bite. "I've been eating plenty and I'm not dead, am I?" That was enough of an invite. One sticky hand reached in and took a cake, followed by another and another, until everyone but Lizzie had a taste of Faeriefruit. "Liz?" I said, holding out the last one. Her mouth was a tight, thin line as she eyed the cake. "What kind is it anyway?" "Faeriefruit. She grows the berries that make the jam herself." "And you think I want to eat witchy food?" "Fine." I shoved it in my mouth before she had a chance to change her mind. She rolled her eyes and walked away, hands in pockets. But for a second, I thought I saw a twitch of regret in the corner of her mouth. "So," Mrs. McKinley said, setting down 2 cups on the table. Tea for her, hot chocolate for me. "Did your friends enjoy the cakes?" I nodded. "Everyone except Liz. She's just so... Ugh! She doesn't want anyone to do anything except what she tells them. It's so annoying." She tilted her head sympathetically. "Some people are just immature. She'll never be a grown-up if she doesn't learn to act like one. Cake, dear?" I nodded again, maybe a little too vigorously. Mrs. McKinley rose up to retrieve her jam and sponge from the cupboard. I was still sat at the table, sipping my drink and swinging my legs, when a gangly shadow flicked across the window. I shot around to look, a splash of hot chocolate hitting my dress as I turned. The garden was empty, the trespasser gone, but a telltale trail of trampled grass led to the Faeriefruit bush and back. I bolted up. "Miss McKinley, I think..." "Leave it, pet. Some people just need to learn a lesson the hard way." The next time I saw Liz, she looked pale, thinner. She didn't seem to tower over the rest of us as much. In the back of my head, I wonder if it was sickness from eating Faeriefruit. Good, I thought. That'll teach her. But a day of tiredness and lethargy soon turned into a week. She was speaking less, standing back more, fading from the group like a shadow scattering under cloud cover. Soon there were days where she didn't come outside at all. I asked about it at school once. She shrugged from across the lunch table, too busy pulling the crust off her uneaten sandwich to even look up. "Just don't feel like playing much. Getting too old for it, you know." I tried to nod convincingly, sympathetically. I didn't know, not really, but it seemed like a polite thing to do. "How come you're not eating?" She shrugged again. "Just not hungry." "Hey, did McKinley give you any more of those cakes?" I shook my head and pretended not to see the way her shoulders drooped with genuine dismay. It turned out that there wouldn't be any more fairy fruit for me either. "Afraid the plant's withered up, pet," Mrs. McKinley told me the next time I came over. She pointed out to the window where the fairy fruit bush once stood. Now there was only a path of empty earth, as fresh as a newly dug grave. "Fairy fruit can be fickle like that. I don't even know if it'll be back next year." I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss it, but not as much as Lizzie, I bet. After all, she only got one taste. I never got the chance to tell her, or even time to decide if I should, because that's when she disappeared from school. First it was just a day, then a second, a third, but by the end of the week our teacher announced Lizzie was in the hospital. Something about not getting enough nutrition. We scribbled cards in class and waited eagerly for the return of the bold, brash Lizzie, hopefully with hospital stories and maybe a scar. But the weeks passed into months, and the weather turned gray, and all our morbid curiosity died away as we realized Lizzie wasn't getting better. I went to see her once, just once. In books and stories, they always say sick people look like ghosts. Lizzie didn't look like a ghost. Lizzie looked dead. The girl who once stood like a sunflower in a field of weeds now lay back on bleached white pillow, little more than a gauzy skeleton. Her lips were cracked like crumbling dust, and I could see the blue of her veins pulsing weakly underneath her pale skin. She didn't talk. I don't think she could talk, and maybe that's for the best. What do you say to someone who's obviously going to die? Lizzie didn't make it till spring. She was buried in a grave so far up the hillside I could see it from my bedroom window. I kept my curtains closed for a long, long time. Some months later, when the last of the slush had melted, my mom took me on one of her regular visits to Granddad's grave. She didn't stop me when I slipped away, wandering my way up the hill. I don't know if I wanted to see Lizzie, but it felt like I had to. As I worked my way through the rows of mismatched headstones, a figure came into view, kneeling over a grave, the grave, with gloves and hat and trowel in hand. A figure I now knew even from afar, Mrs. McKinley. "They never tell you about the weeds," she called out as I kept coming closer. She didn't seem surprised to see me. She never did. Good earth makes for good weeds, even when there are bodies underneath. But maybe today we've got something even better. She looked so at ease with her hands in the earth, the new grass not even grown over. As I watched her, I remembered what Mrs. McKinley said about fairy folk, how you'll never get a straight answer out of them. I remember how I asked her if she really was a witch. She gave me a list of all the witchy things she didn't do, but she never said no. With one tug, Miss McKinley pulled something up, a tangle of roots, thin and fine that seemed to go on forever. She wiped the glistening sweat off her brow. "Good news! There'll be plenty of jam this year." My stomach lurched. I could see the head she was holding now, gangly leaves of 5 and blood-red berries not yet ripe, growing right over Lizzie's grave. Mrs. McKinley gave me a dark, knowing smile. "You know, some people think fairy fruit is a bit bitter." She plucked a single berry and popped it in her mouth. "But I think it's the sweetest fruit of all." So quoth this raven. Oh, my darlings, you know absolutely why I love this story. Yes, The Evil Fae. If you liked it, please let Casper McSadden know. Let me know by giving it a like. And if you comment, I'll do my best to comment back. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Bye-bye.